Welcome to the first video in the Math Formulas video series. In this video we'll be going over the sum, count, and average formulas, and then we'll turn them into 3D formulas. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now let me start by talking about this table quickly. This is May invoices, and each line is its own invoice, and it has one product that has been sold for each invoice. Now it comes down to here where it says the sum total is this amount. So the extended price column is being summed up, then we're counting the extended price, and then we're averaging the extended price. So if you've never used the sum formula, it's very basic. All it takes is some numbers or any reference cell within the formula. As you can see here, it's just looking for the arguments number 1 and 2 and so forth. If you backspace it up, you can see that it says it adds all the numbers in a range of cells. So let me open the parentheses. Let me put my first number in, this, comma, let's say this one, comma, and then this one. So if I just sum these three together, it will be that total. Or you could write it in the fashion such as I can select this group and then separate it with a comma and say the second group would be this one, omitting this middle one. And that would be the total of these numbers. Or you could put in, instead of 2 ranges, you could just put 1 range and then 1 reference cell. And then you could even say $100. So if that turned out to be $13.57, if I take out the $100, you'll see that it's $12.57. I'm just double checking that it is correctly working. You can also add a sum to a sum. So you could say the sum of these three plus 100 on the outside of the sum formula. Just remember that when you're using this, just remember the order of operations of when math gets evaluated, such as exponents come first and then it goes to parentheses and then into multiplication, division, adding, subtracting, all left to right. So something to keep in mind. So let's just go ahead and edit this formula so that it goes back to summing the entire column of the extended price. And let's talk about this count formula. And this count formula is basically the same thing as the sum formula, but instead of summing its contents, it's just counting the number of contents that are in this range. And really it's counting not just contents that are in the range, but it counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. Okay, so you have to pay attention to it for if it has numbers or doesn't have numbers. For instance, this range should come back as 0. Because it doesn't have any numbers. So you have to understand what the function is counting. We'll go over count A and count blank a little bit later, which do other things. So count A counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So that doesn't matter if it's text or numbers. And then count blank obviously counts the number of empty cells. But right now for count, it's the same type of arguments that it's asking for. You can put in values instead of numbers. So this value range, and you can separate it with a comma and say these top two and these bottom two and say add those or count those together, and it returns 4, just as I'd expect. But the only thing that I would be careful with is you may say, oh, but I want to put in 50 other ones, 50, count 50 to it. So if you might put 50 right here, but it's only going to come back 5 because it's looking at 50 as a value, saying that it's just one extra value. So it only added 1 versus adding 50 to your number. So instead you'd have to say outside of the count formula, add 50. Then you get 54. So I'm going to switch this back again, so it's just summing this range. The next thing is the average formula, which goes ahead and has basically the same arguments as the sum formula, a little bit different than the count, which said value, but it's really the same. So it's just separating by numbers again, and it works the exact same way. So I can put in a comma and say not just this first range, but also this second range. Go ahead and find the average for me. And 321 is that average. So I'm going to undo that and go back to just this average, and let's just test this. So if I take the sum total and divide that by the number of rows in that total, which is 6, that turns out to be 409.47 rounded up to 48. So the average is showing us the correct number. Now, the last thing we'll go over is 3D formulas, and they're really easy to use but not very commonly used. So I'm going to make a few copies of this tab. So I'm actually clicking and holding, and then while I'm dragging it over, I'm holding Control, and this little plus sign you can see appears. And when that plus sign appears, it's saying it's going to make a copy. So I'm going to call this number 3, this one's number 2, and I'm actually going to make one more copy, and we'll call this the Summary tab. This one we had the May invoices. Let's say we're going to summarize the 3 months, May, June, and July invoices, and on one tab called the Summary tab. So July, and this one will be called Summary. So Summary, and we no longer need this data, but we want to summarize it right here in this cell, the sum, the count, and the average. Now I'm going to quickly go ahead and just summarize the formula while I type it, and then we'll go over it in detail. So I'm using the sum formula. I'm going to navigate to this first tab, and what we're trying to do is add up each month, May through July. So I'm going to take this cell, and I want to go through the 3rd month. So I'm holding Shift and clicking the 3. That selects all of the months, and I'm going to close up the formula, and it's complete. So now you're probably questioning, how is this working? And you may want to go ahead and manually add it up to 7,300. So let's take the first tab and take this and actually just multiply by 3. That will add all 3 tabs together. And you can see that it's adding to the same amount. It's just rounding it up $1. So now that we understand that it's working correctly, how is this working? And we have to think about what this is called. So it's called 3D, and it's called 3D because it's going between different tabs. It's not just all on one tab, which would be 2-dimensional. 2 things, if you can think of 3 pieces of paper stacked up, that means that it's coming out at you, meaning it's 3D. So you have the first month, May, and then between the 3rd month is obviously the 2nd month, so June, and then July is here as well. So May through July, and it's grabbing only what's on G15. And again, it needs to specifically be on G15 to be added together. Otherwise, it won't add G15 plus G14 plus G15 or something like that. So let's go ahead and practice 2 more times on the count and average formula. So once you write the formula and have the open parentheses, you want to navigate to the first tab where you're going to start adding from or using this formula on between the different sheets that you're talking about. So the 3 reference comes in this place right here is when I hold Shift and then navigate through the tab that I want it to add between or count between. So you saw there it has 1, 2, and 3 highlighted, and in the formula bar it's also updated through number 3. I'm going to close the parentheses and hit enter. Now the question is why did it pull back 3? And it pulled back 3 because it's only counting each sheet that I included in here. It's not adding. So I really want to use the sum formula to add the different counts on each tab. And that would make sense, 18. I think it was 6 per sheet, so 6 times 3 is 18. We'll do the same thing with average one more time. So average, and once you get to this point, you go ahead and you navigate to the sheet, select it, then you hold Shift and click through the last tab that you want to have it averaging between, close the parentheses, and hit enter. Now there's only one thing you really need to watch out for when using 3D references, and that's when you rearrange tabs. So say for instance I need to move tab number 2 to the other side of Summary, then I can navigate back to Summary and you can see that I'm down like $2,400 less than it was before. My count is now 12 instead of 18, and this is because it's only adding between tabs 1 and 3, and between 1 and 3 are just these 2 tabs, and number 2 is now outside of it, therefore it's not being added. So to easily get it back, you can just drag that formula or drag that tab back between the 2, navigate back to Summary, and it's updated again. This might be useful though if you're going ahead and trying to pull out quarterly data and only see 3 months at a time, or all 12 months at a time, or 6 months, or whatever that case may be. You can simply grab the tabs and pull it outside of the formula range.